Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leaders Show, where this week we're discussing people versus technology in the workforce, plus other headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. Each week, we discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and the audio recording is available on major podcast platforms. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up ERPA AI and the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members worldwide, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a researcher, the author of The Rules of Persuasion, educator at University of Maryland in Georgetown, and former advisor from EY and Accenture. Good afternoon, buddy.
Good to see you again. Nice to be back.
So, what before we jump into our main story, what's happening today? I've been on a webinar and a bunch of events all morning, so I have no idea what's going on in the world, Carlos.
As you know, I check the markets on a daily basis and always interested to see what Wall Street is up to. And it's a Fed day, of course, so the market has been on a remarkable run right over the last week or so. And I was talking to my wife a couple of months ago, and I said, "Hey, I think if things go well, we'll see SPY hit 440 sometime, maybe September or so. We're pretty close to it today, or I think we're 437, 438, kind of hovering around there. So the market has decided that the Fed isn't going to raise any more interest rates, right? It's time for a pause. And so it's happy days are here again. It seems a little optimistic to me, frankly. And it seems like NVIDIA, our topic of the day, sort of NVIDIA kind of driving it to a certain extent. It's on a real tear again. It's back to where it was the morning after sort of the big push that it had after earnings announcement. So Wall Street is happy. We'll see if they're happy at 231 after Mr. Powell makes his remarks, right?
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. I think I alluded to this last week or the week before, but with everybody talking about recession, you mentioned kind of bull market now on the S&P, in the past week, and yeah, the Nvidia now surpassing that one trillion mark. We're going to talk a lot about jobs and related today, but I don't know. The optimist in me is like, where are the indicators of bad stuff? It seems like everybody's just kind of adjusting and tweaking, and the Fed looks like they're going to hold on interest rates. It looks like companies are still hiring, investing, which we're going to talk about. So this so-called soft landing might be a reality.
That's what it looks like, and certainly that's what the market has priced in. Again, we'll see if in the remarks later on today, sort of where that goes, right? But certainly the consensus to be, I think it was only the analyst at Citi who was saying we just don't agree with that. We actually might see them do a quarter point today hike, so they're not 100% on this is just going to be a pass. But everyone else sort of seems to be, and certainly the market, like I said, has sort of priced. And that's been on the news. Of course, we had this remarkable event yesterday. Again, doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on, right? To watch a former president be arraigned as a federal defendant was kind of a remarkable sight, I think, for everybody. So once again, right, we see kind of where that takes us over the course of the next few months, especially in an election, as the election cycle kind of kicks off, right? As a political watcher, which I am, and I talk a lot about that in my book, and kind of how politics works with messaging. I'll be watching closely kind of what happens now and how this is how everyone else in the race, right, reacts to this. We saw yesterday, I think, the first couple of hints. Mike Pence, a couple other. Well, Christie has been pretty blunt about saying, "Look, read the indictment, right? You'll see kind of what's there." So we'll see where the rest of the field kind of decide that, hey, it's time to use this against Mr. Trump, or whether they feel like he's still too powerful to kind of go against. So another remarkable day, right? We saw it in New York a few weeks ago, and now in Miami.
Yeah, and if you're sick of the political news, you should go and get in your bunker, because there'll be more and more of it. The other follow up from a previous show is, we were talking about, should companies take a stand on social issues? We talked about this Bud Light thing that had happened, and according to I'm not sure which outlet reported this, but Wall Street Journal, this boycott is actually causing Bud Light to lose the top spot in beer market share.
That's right. I read that same article, right? And it seems to be again a consequence of certain part of the market didn't like their positioning. And here we go again. There was another thing with the LA Dodgers, I guess, which the Journal wrote about this morning, critiquing the Dodgers organization with the way they handled, an event, a visiting event. And so, yeah, this is not going away, right? And we talked about this, and it's clearly, if you're a CEO now, or leader of a company, chief marketing officer, right, chief comms officer, you really have to be thinking about something on a daily basis, right? Especially again going into an election cycle, which always generates its own new kinds of headlines, which is what I expect for the course of the next year. We talked about this will be the first real AI-driven election. We're already seeing signs of that, right? We've seen already sort of deep fake videos, altered images. It's only going to increase, and this it remains to be seen, right? What role does this particular technology play in a democracy kind of going forward over the course of the next 12 months?
So now, you have this economic condition, some economic situation, and then you have, the jobs thing. And so this is how it relates to our main topic of kind of, people versus technology. This really interesting article, which kind of summed up some of our conversations. Carlos was in AP News that hiring in the U.S. jumped last month, but so did unemployment.
Yeah. Well, we're entering this again, right? This next phase of a transformational general purpose technology, sort of we talked about this before, right? We're realigning kind of what labor, right, is. And there was another interesting article about the role of McDonald's and White Castle of the first sort of chatbots for taking orders and the reaction from customers and even from some of the employees and how this is working. And the stories try to put a positive spin on it that, hey, listen, this is not creating unemployment. We're short on labor already. So this allows us to kind of to let the people who are taking orders do more important work inside the restaurant. But on the other hand, at least all the kind of macroeconomic kind of, I'd say the consensus is that that's really a very optimistic view that like in the past, right, sort of evolutions, there's a whole population of the workforce that's going to lose its job. Now, of course, it always creates other jobs, right? We know this. And so, but is it going to offset what's going to be lost? I don't think so. And I think most people sort of who look at this on a serious basis would agree. And there's a part of the society that will lose because of this.
Yeah, and I think it gets to first, first another stat, right? So there's supposedly 1.5 available jobs for every American, but meanwhile unemployment is up, right? So to me, this shows a mismatch, and actually this comes full circle, Carlos. I think our first ever digital leader show, maybe a year ago, was about education and training and so to me what these numbers say is that companies are hiring. There's so a lot of open job specs. If you look around, in the technology space, there's huge job openings. Some of these companies can't hire quickly enough, but meanwhile the unemployment rate is still pretty high. So
Well,
to
that's
me this means something, right?
right. There's always this cycle, right, of new technologies come, new skills are needed, and there's usually a shortage at the cutting edge of skill sets like we see it in AI, right? At the same time, other skills become obsolete because they're replaced by the ones that are being created that are new. If you're a tech worker, you're always on this sort of treadmill in a way, right? Of keeping, at least what I saw when I was a consultant, you never can sort of just sit back and say, okay, I'm good. Because every 5 years or so, something new comes along and the skill set that you had so it has to be refreshed or realigned with what tech is moving. And we're seeing that right now with AR and VR and a bunch of other things, right, that are coming down the road. And so as one group kind of gets left behind, another group appears with that skill set. As I always say, right, Silicon Valley is always in a war against labor. It's technology where you get rich there by making jobs go away in many cases. And so there's always going to be this mismatch between workers at one end, right, where skills are becoming more and more obsolete, and workers at the other end, where the skills are really high in high demand, and they command a premium, right? So it's interesting. Like in the book Capital for Century, Thomas Piketty talked about management. We used to think about management and labor, right? Now we have management, labor, and talent. And I think talent he defines as those people who have exceptional skills that are in very high demand that are not the owners of capital, right? But they command a premium in the workplace, and we're seeing it at the other end. We're seeing that right now, right? You've got people who have certain skills that are very, very much in demand, and the ones who are like some of the retail work talk about being one of the worst jobs in America, right? That they and which a lot of that job growth is. It's not in the middle, right? We've seen white collar jobs sort of diminish. It's at the higher end where skills are very hard to find, and then at the lower end where it's almost commodity labor these days.
Yeah, but to me, it's slightly different. To me, you have these. I mean, there's a road by me where, like, probably a lot of towns where it's like it's fast food alley, right? There's like everything. 14 different restaurants, from the McDonald's of the world and Dairy Queens up to Applebee's, and every single one of them has a sign that they're hiring. I mean, every single one. It's been like that for 8 or 9 months. So clearly there's a demand there. Now, maybe those are not the jobs that people want or are looking for in the current.
Jobs don't pay a living wage, right, Dan? If you go back, there was a book that came out a long time ago. Barbara Eichenbach, I think, or Heinrich, wrote a book called Nickel and Dime in America, where she spent a year living on minimum wage. And the story she tells of working as a waitress, working as a maid, working as a fast food person, right? You can't live on the salary that these jobs pay. And even people who are in the gig economy, there've been a lot of articles about how that's sort of turning sour, and people are complaining that if they could make a living in the past, right, today in many cases they can't. And so, yeah, there may be lots of jobs, but are they jobs that create a sustainable life for someone? In a lot of cases, that's not the case, right, Dan? So yeah, okay, working on jobs, they're jobs that basically you're working poor. Again, that's you know
So that's that. I think that's the challenge, right? And it's also it's probably a different a demo, right? Than the people that were doing those jobs, before. Maybe there's a factor of certain groups still not participating in the workforce. But I think what you also have is, this kind of and this is where it gets to the AI stuff. I think, some of the initial research that's come out has kind of pointed towards an elimination of middle level managers, right? The really high end stuff still exists, and the kind of low end work still exists, but it's that middle management that certain people are kind of going after. I mean, Zuckerberg at Meta was actually talking about the elimination of the middle manager not too long ago, and I think that may be where a lot of this AI impact happens. It's knowledge workers, right? It's not necessarily the blue collar workers, but it's knowledge workers that aren't in that top tier, at least from the standpoint of their positions.
well, you have two phenomena, I think, Dan. One, the middle management was classic, and the back to the classic corporate theory was a command and control layer, right? They took the ideas of senior executives and they made them happen. They passed on the orders or the desires, the strategy of the executive class, right? And then they made sure that the workers were doing whatever they were doing. I think two things have happened. One is, like, we've seen more and more technology, so like you said, play that role. So you don't have to do that because technology is sort of helping pass along, right, what the company wants. But there's also a kind of self-management, which we see more and more, right? We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the idea of being watched while you work, monitored, right? So technology allows one person to monitor hundreds of employees now, right, instead of two or three. And so people autocorrect and they self manage in a way. And this is much certainly the case before COVID. So now, if technology and or self management more and more replaces the job that a quote unquote middle manager used to do, that explains why you don't need as many middle managers. They always kind of take, right? It's easy to critique middle managers, right, in the corporate world. It's been there since I started working. But the reality is that there is a change there because technology is making a difference. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we got to, we've kind of danced around this a bunch, as an industry, I think for a while. When automation happened and RPA happened, we kind of said, hey, this isn't going to take jobs away. It's going to repurpose jobs. And then, the initial AI stuff was, hey, this is not going to take your job. You're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI. But I think the reality is, we're starting to see this mismatch, right? We're starting to see some research around, companies who are investing in technology, are still profitable, but are hiring less. And so to me, that signifies some of this change. And then if you look at some of the stats, that at least we've seen around AI, there's just not a big push to educate and train the workforce. One stat I saw said 49% of employees want to be trained in AI and have not.
Well,
Right?
there's
So companies
always
are slow.
Yeah, but then there's always this issue, right, in tech of and how management looks at it. And we had this question about there are lots of people in tech who are out of work. And I think my experience was there are some technologies that you say, okay, I can port the workforce over to that technology, right? So you say, look, there's a new kind of database. I'm just going to put it into the air, right? So there's new kinds of ways of making databases. Okay, the person who knew how to make databases the old way can be reconfigured, right, for
Right.
the next generation.
Pivot. The big word was pivot.
Right, technology. But there are some technologies that come along, and management says, you know what, they can't make the leap, right? It's a bridge too far. And the people who are doing X are not going to be able to do whatever it is that's sort of the new thing. And I think you're seeing that with AI. The more you hear about something being transformational, life changing, existential threat, right? We've never seen anything like it before. Then you have to extrapolate from that. The least likely it is that the skill sets of any given workforce is going to be able to move into that new technology, right? And so we may be seeing some of that, which is that the management is saying, you know what, this is so revolutionary that you're either going to come in sort of as a native AI person or you're not, because we don't see a big section of the tech workforce being able to move into this new technology.
Yeah, and it's significant, I think, in the sense that, in the past, these technologies disrupted a particular function or a particular, even a particular industry. I don't think there's been something since I've been covering this, at least, that maybe robotic process automation, but that was really more about band-aiding and keeping legacy systems and maybe even avoiding some digital transformation. Right now, this is affecting every industry and every job in that area that we're talking about. There's some stats this week that I saw that AI and big data, can automate nearly 80% of physical work, 70% of data processing, 64% of data collection. I mean, there's a whole industry of analysts, right, in multiple verticals.
And that we've seen, claims of 6-7x productivity for software coders. Not since the late 90s and the web itself, right, have we seen something come along. Again, it's still very early, and a lot of AI is hype, as somebody just noted, right? So how much of that is real? But if you kind of peel back the hype, some very serious, right, people are saying, yeah, okay, there's a lot of hype, but there's also some substance. It's not just all sizzle. There's some stake there. So we're about to go into something completely different. You're seeing in education, certainly this is the case, right? And there was an article in the Times this week about people who had left Silicon Valley who are being talent that's being drawn back, right? The ones who are lucky enough to have the skills that can be ported are now returning because the money, the hype, the next thing is sort of there, right? Tech people are always usually attracted to sort of what's next, right? We like that. And so that phenomenon, right, of look, there's something happening here and I want to be part of that. Because when you say existential threat, which is the term that's used right now, it's existential in what way, right? At the macro, but also in the individual level, right? If you're a technologist and this is now how technology is defined, what drives enterprise systems, you're out of that conversation, then you've got a problem.
Well, I know, and this is true in, I guess, all politics, but I remember, when our only association was the Outsourcing Institute, and I remember, watching one of the presidential elections and thinking to myself, these guys either have no idea what they're talking about, or, and probably the more likely scenario is, they're completely lying to people about what's happening in the industry. It was the first time that, I was an expert in a particular industry and I knew what they were saying, without a doubt was complete a BS. And I think, at least in the US, I think Europe's been a little bit better with this, but, at least in the US, we've been pretending that this hasn't been going on for a long time. So I think part of the show, I don't think it's hype. I think it's real. And I think it's especially shocking because number one, you have AI, which is advanced, exponentially. But number two, at least in the US, there's been 5 or 6 years worth of really interesting, workforce changes, digital transformation in companies that if you talk to politicians, they have no idea it's going on. They're still talking about manufacturing jobs and fossil fuel, right? They're not talking about this stuff.
And again, right, the difference between the U.S. and Europe stands in contrast. I was reading this week about the new European AI Act, which is the first sort of big framework to regulate AI in Europe, and they think things like, right, they're banning real-time facial recognition. AI has to be self-identifying, which has been a thing that the theorists have talked about. You cannot put, and this is one of the things like they mentioned in the fast food article, right? That people were saying, look, I'd like to know whether I'm talking to a machine or to a person. In Europe, the feeling is, hey, if you're talking to a machine, the machine should let you know that you're talking to a machine. When you're having that conversation right now, starting to regulate machine versus people, right? Facial recognition, all these kinds of new technologies, it is more than hype, right? There is a serious conversation going on. It's ironic that we make it here, but it gets taken more seriously, right, as a social issue in some other places. The American attitude of, look, innovation, whatever happens kind of happens, we'll fix things a priori once we know there's a very serious problem. That's how AI is developing. And we have these calls from people who are, when the people who are making it are saying, we don't know what we're making. Maybe it's time to take a pause at GPT-4, but I don't see that happening, right? It looks like we're just going to go.
I'm not against the regulations. I think when we talked about the AI regulation framework in the EU a few weeks ago, I think I mentioned that I'm supportive of it. My issue with it is, number one, the people, at least right now, that are regulating it know nothing about it, right? Which is dangerous to innovation and advancement. And number two, it's dangerous to innovation and advancement, right? So my fear is that,
I'd have to push back on that, right? Who knows everything about it? Nobody. And so if you're a regulator, what do? Do you just wait? It's like crypto in the US, right? Do you say, okay, well, since I'm not an expert in AI, I'm just going to sit back and let the market do whatever it wants to do? Or as a regulator, you have a responsibility to try to at least put in some framework. I know there's consultation, there's conversations. I don't think, I hope not, isn't just somebody just writes a law in a closet and says, okay, that's tomorrow, this is the law.
If you watch the congressional hearing, which I know you did, where they interviewed Mark Zuckerberg about Facebook, I'm convinced not a single person in that room should have anything to do with regulation. Right. So it's more about, do you get the, maybe they get the right people. We've talked about, they form a committee, they get a group that can do it, but a bunch of congressmen grilling, a millennial about Facebook, or even the Ticketmaster CEO we talked about, asking them why they can't stop bots on their platform. These guys thinking about the bot he sees in his local grocery store. He has no idea what he's talking about.
Well, when I was referring to the European Act, I think one of the issues we have here is that people don't see, in many cases, becoming an AI regulator as quote unquote sexy of a job as creating the AI, right? So why would you kind of pursue that? In other places, it's a little bit different. So the question becomes, okay, for us, do we just let it run its course and fix it after the fact, right? Maybe with some things that's not a problem, but you keep hearing from the people who are making this, that's not the case here. Right?
I think the issue I have, and I agree with you, right? The answer somewhere in between. But if you think about the conversation we had, I think it was with a Trent, from a former Amazon privacy guy, where we talked about kind of compliance and regulations and things like that. Part of the issue becomes, there's no incentive for a government regulator, let's say, to allow something like that to happen, right? It's one of the issues we talked about was in corporations even, right? In banks and retail companies or whatever, you have IT people, you have compliance people, you have regulatory people, you have procurement people. And my feeling is, a lot of those organizations aren't innovating and are going out of going out of business, going bankrupt right now because they haven't incentivized their people to innovate, right? They've incentivized their people to block and be secure, but not to innovate because they feel that security or regulation and compliance is better than innovation. That's true on steroids with regulation, right? So how do you find the balance where if you look at some of these regulations, the EU one, now they're going after Google, trying to break it up on antitrust. These things are not productive. I don't think. I think that they're just slowing these companies down or making it more difficult for them. What are these governments doing about the job issues, right? I mean, if these jobs go away, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with all these people that are unemployable? Why aren't we talking about how to get them trained and educated and get them? There's no talk about that.
Well, let's go back a second, though. It's hard to prove a negative. It can't prove that having Google be a monopoly isn't a problem, right? Because we don't know what a world in which Google is not a monopoly looks like. All right. And so
We saw it with all the telephone companies, and we've had terrible telephone service for 25 years when they broke that company up.
right, but does that mean that the what we get today from Google is the best that we could get? All right. Are we getting the best browser? Are we getting the best search? Obviously not, because they're now trying to catch up. So would we have had a much better type of AI search 5 years ago if the market wasn't dominated by one company? Right. We don't know. That's the issue. We can say, okay, this regulation hurts competition, but if you go back to classic macro theory, what happens is you wind up with oligopolies, right? The tech market and search and other areas is exactly what you get in textbook and freshman economics, which is that eventually you have lots of markets, lots of companies in the market, and eventually a few become sort of the big sharks, and you wind up with two or three dominant players that are too big to destroy each other, or they sort of reach a stasis or an equilibrium. And that's
Fair
kind of
enough, but look at what happened with ChatGPT. I mean, OpenAI was a startup. I mean, it was under the radar. It's part of the reason why it surprised everybody. It was under the radar, and Google missed out, Microsoft missed it, Amazon missed it. So I'm not saying that I have the facts to say all these legal disputes and stuff were the reason, but do you really want a company who's not well regulated? The next FTX essentially, right? Who flies under the radar, isn't big enough. First Republic, Bank and SVP. These guys, missed the ceiling
no,
of regulation,
you're all
right?
about innovation. So if Google were not a monopoly, maybe you would have gotten your innovation right in 2010. You would have had OpenAI in 2000,
Right,
not in
right,
2023, right? It's
right.
because they control this market. You got two basically dominant players. You look at the markets, Microsoft and Google, in terms of AI, everyone's racing to catch up, unless Apple has a secret lab someplace that nobody knows about, which is highly possible
Very
since
possible.
nobody knows about, right? Then you could easily make the case that the monopoly of comes to Google, right? Your monopoly is why it had to come right from OpenAI. It had to come under the radar. It wasn't the companies who are dominating the market that we think are great that are bringing us the next generation of technology. Hmm? So if that's part of their role, then they fail, and that's
But did they fail because they're too busy dealing with regulation?
I think they fail because once you become a monopoly, you kind of devote your energy to protecting that monopoly.
Maybe, but I could tell you firsthand. I mean, there's a dozen banking executives that I've met, probably more over the years. We used to do a Wall Street tech conference, and I'd ask these guys questions on the record and then speak to them a lot of time off the record. And they were so consumed by regulation. I'm not saying it's bad. Obviously, we just had a banking issue, so maybe there's not enough, but they were so consumed. I mean, we used to talk about digital transformation 5 years ago. They'd laugh at me. They'd be like, I don't have time to do digital transformation. I got to deal with these regulators are at my, what?
And by the way, I'm talking about two different things. There's regulation and there's the question of monopolies, right? And the question that I'm talking about is, did Google get to the point a decade ago or 5 years ago that it was too big to be innovative anymore? And that's why it didn't create OpenAI. That's why it didn't create ChatGPT, because it was too busy protecting monopoly. And a lot of monopolies are unseen. We talk about Google or maybe Amazon, but I've over my career talked to a lot of executives who they're the only ones that make a certain chemical. right? And they have 85% market share. So to make product X, you have to use this chemical. It's a coating or some sort of binding agent. And you know what? They control the market. These things, well, my experience with them was that they weren't trying to make the chemical better. They were trying to make sure that nobody else can make it because life was good when you've got 85% market share. Okay, you don't grow as much, right? But when you're whatever you make is required to make something else, right? And it's an important thing. You kind of, it's human nature. You sort of worry more about not losing that than saying, okay, let me go take a bunch of risk, digital transform my company so that I can invent the next version. It's already used by everybody.
Yeah.
So that's the question. Has have companies like Google got to the point where rather than the argument for them is, look, don't regulate because I'm innovative, the argument should be, listen, nothing to be done because they're not bringing you the next thing, and startups have to. So I don't know.
I guess my point is I'd like to see policy that incents companies to innovate the way that somebody, the government, a third party, whatever you decide, wants them to, like within certain frameworks, instead of saying, no, you can't do this. And no, we're going to go after you for doing that in hindsight. Cause by the way, a lot of this stuff is 3 years old by the time it gets, I mean, even the whole crypto thing recently. I mean, these guys have been operating for 3 years, 4 years. And now all of a sudden they're going to shut them down. Why not have policy ahead of the game? To say, hey, this is what's happening. Here's what we're going to allow. Here's what we're not going to allow. And by the way, here's where we're going to give subsidies, tax breaks, incentives to companies who innovate and do things the right way. And maybe, by the way, even help with this job issue. I mean, if you look at some of these stats. So as you're talking, I just pulled up this study. McKinsey just came out with a study, which is right on what we're talking about. They're saying that the $4.4 trillion in value, about 4.5% of global economic output, is going to be affected by generative AI. They talk about customer operations, marketing, sales, software engineering, R&D. These are high value, high wage knowledge jobs in tech, banking, and retail that are most likely to be impacted. We got to do something about the employment issue.
Well, that's what I'm curious about, because you talk to executives way more than I do these days. And so do you get a sense that CIOs and CTOs and CEOs that you talk to are taking this seriously, that they at the corporate level are saying it's part of my responsibility to bring my workforce over into this AI world? Or do they go, well, look, the market will sort it out. Those who can make the transition will make it, good for them. Those who can't, will be yesterday's news. We don't live in a society where the government, because we don't want it to, right, plays its role for the most part like it does in other countries. Here we say the free market will sort out who makes the transition into an AI future and who doesn't. So we saw it was outsourcing, right? It wasn't the government that set up an outsourcing relief fund like it did which happened in other places. It just didn't happen here. So this is the next thing. Then it's either the companies will do it or individuals will do it, because we don't ask society to play that function in this country.
So I think you have three things happening. There's three answers to your question. And I'm not a consultant, so I'm not intending to answer your question with depends, which is the consulting response. But it depends on your perspective, right? I would say the technology companies get it because they're in technology. And I think so they've been advancing in this. They've been trying to figure out the right balance between people and technology for a while. They're at least trying to hire the right people. And many of them, as we've talked about before, have invested heavily into training programs, right? So, I spoke to a software company a few years ago that basically reallocated a good chunk of their marketing budget towards hiring, training, and recruiting, hiring, and training a workforce that they could not find through the traditional education system, or in the U.S. or really anywhere globally, right? So they basically said, we don't need more leads. It's all coming in. We can't keep up, right? I have other tech companies that are more about providing physical FTEs that they've got 100 job recs out any given time for people in this space, and they can't seem to get enough people. Now, the other side of it is on the client side. So, technology leaders within the banks and the retail companies and some of these other industries, many of them are behind, and my feeling is, and this is unscientific, but just anecdotally through a lot of the conversations I've had, they know what they need to do, but they just can't get it done. There's too much regulation. There's too much compliance, even internally within the organization, too much bureaucracy, into the organization, to the extent that some of these guys have built or acquired smaller firms. Take a bank, for example. Some of them have acquired fintech firms so they can kind of push all their innovation through that group without having to deal with all the bureaucracy.
Well, to me, this is one of the big social questions we have, because if it is what we keep saying that it is, right? This is a transformational thing, like the web was 25 years ago. Then it's going to be a mass destruction. We saw what happened, right, to a big chunk of society, and we're still dealing with the aftermath of that today, because the political class didn't take it seriously, and like you said, didn't deal with it honestly. I was there too, and I saw the same thing. If this is history sort of repeating itself, and we're just going to let this sort of play itself out, it's going to be a different group, but the impact might be just as profound. And in 10 years or so, we'll be dealing with a whole other section of American society that was sort of left out in the AI cold, right? Because people who are making decisions right now about who gets to come along and who doesn't, right? Who will be educated and who isn't, all right? Either, like you said, don't understand it, or are too busy with other stuff. But this is not a small thing. This is if what we see is even half of it is true, right? You're going to have a huge reshifting, like you said, of what, and what you say, what work is, right, and who benefits, right? And we see this every 20 or so years. There's a whole new group again of winners and losers as technology evolves, and yeah, we don't have a good track record in this country of
Yeah.
worrying about those who are sort of left out in the cold when something transformational comes along. So
And I'll give you one more specific example. So I was at a customer experience conference last week, as I mentioned to you the other day, and no surprise, AI was kind of top of the priority list for this company, and what they were promoting around their offerings. But I was really not surprised, but impacted by some of the stats that I learned. One of the things that they talked about was AI and customer experience and customer service is already, and this is like very nascent, right? It's already reducing handling time of customer experience calls by a third.
wow,
That's already right. They've got some technology around analytics and knowledge bases alone that is already reducing agent workloads by an hour a day. In other words, these reps would spend an hour a day not on the phones, just doing research and looking stuff up in multiple systems and multiple databases. They've got an hour more a day of productivity alone already, because of large language models that ChatGPT are based on. And then I asked some of the executives there who are thought leaders, and they run thousands and thousands of customer service interactions every day. I said, what happens with those agents? And they said, well, the great thing about the AI is you learn who your best agents are, and you learn what's working and what's not working in real time, and then you can train an AI or other people to do what the top agents are doing based on customer satisfaction, and focus on those things, and then automate what you've learned. Is 85% of the time it's the same thing over and over again, right? So I said, what happens to those people? They said, well, the top, whatever it was, I forget the number, 5, 10, 15%, they focus on the really high end tasks, concierge kind of stuff.
right.
What happens to the rest of those people? What happens to the other 70, 80%?
Yeah. The other thing, I had dinner last week with somebody who works at Amazon, and we were talking about machine learning and sort of working with that inside of Amazon. And one of the interesting things was just talking through, it's a different skill set than quote unquote coding, right? This is another issue that it's not, well, I have to learn a new language, right? The old days, well, I learned this, and so I learned a new programming language. This isn't really a programming language, right? It's a completely different way of thinking. It's, I'd say, I hate to use this word, it's not really fair, but maybe it's sort of more creative sort of role of thinking through, okay, what do I want this machine to do? What does it need to understand in order to do it? It's almost like training a person in a strange sort of way than it is, okay, I have to write so many lines of code to get an app to work. So I think that's the other issue. That's not an easy thing to find, right? Thinking through I was reading through one of the reports that I prepping for the show, and it was recommendations for sort of setting up AI sandboxes, right? That companies could start to create environments where people could come and experiment and learn, as because this is sort of trial and error kind of learning, right? It is nothing where, okay, here, learn these 12 skills and you're good to go. It takes time. And so that's the interesting thing is, will these companies provide the space, right, for that workforce, the tech workforce, to come in and say, okay, I need to, not just tech workforce, everybody, right? Because we see, like you said, it's almost every job. There are people who are writers, educators, teachers, HR, trainers. They're all having to deal with the same exact issue. So um, I'm sure that in most of these big companies, right, the demand for a way of learning these new technology is far outweighs the supply that's available for people, and that's unfortunate. It creates an imbalance, and like you said, who gets access becomes the big question. And if it certainly is, I hope something that people are sort of thinking through right now, um, to give people a chance to make it across to the other side of the bridge.
There was this stat, that came out a while ago. We may have even mentioned it on this show. That's something like 40% of people in a job today were unfulfilled by their job, right? They felt like they were unfulfilled, or some definition of unhappy, with their job. If the people that are fulfilled are the ones that stay, and then those people get kind of repurposed to something that they actually like doing, then maybe it's not a bad thing. I just think we got to figure it out, before we have just people without jobs that can't, afford to live. But I would say, and I think we should leave off with the positive. I mean, this hope in what you just said, Carlos, which is, wait a second, there's actually an opportunity here, because one of the benefits is that people have access to it now. What's great about ChatGPT, as we've talked about, is it's democratized to a level, at least, that we can play with it. So, for the 50% of people that want to be trained on AI and have not, go get trained, go find resources, come to us and other organizations, and play with it. You can play with it for free. It's not even a barrier of $20 a month. If you're a third world country and you have internet access, you can play with this thing, right? And so, that's the other thing that's revolutionary about this is, I've been in automation and AI for 10 years. I never actually played with AI myself until ChatGPT came out, right? So you also have the opportunity for maybe the first time, where you don't need to leave your house or put on any clothes. You just need an internet connection, and you can see some of the capabilities of this stuff. Unlike previous technology that had a barrier of entry, or unlike the AI, which was essentially a black box for many years.
Well, I think that's one other thing too, which brings back to one of my favorite topics, right? Classic topic for our show, which is education. I've argued for, I don't know, a decade, that the idea of you go to college when you're 18 and you're done when you're 22, and that's it. There's no other formal education unless you get a master's degree here and there, right? That's all the college you're going to need in life. If the colleges really thought strategically, if they were really innovative, and I had this conversation with a dean one time, and he agreed. He said, "Listen, when you're changing jobs now, right? Whatever the latest number is, 5, 6 times in a career, maybe more. Then why do you go to college only once? Is this idea that what you learn when you're 18 is going to be good enough to carry you for 50 years of work? It's crazy to me. The school should offer 1 year or 2 year degree programs, right? I call them bachelor's plus, and so, which is not a mass necessarily, but it's a second bachelor's that you pick up maybe after 10 years, after every decade or so, right? Which keeps you kind of up to speed. Imagine if that existed. Imagine that if every major state university had a second bachelor's program. It's a year, right? And you could say, okay, you know what? I need to take a year off from work. I'm going to go get my second BA in AI. It's designed to handle professionals during the course of their career. And you might do this 3 or 4 times when all is said and done, right? I've read articles about people who do really well, and then when they retire, they go back to college. That's great. They're rich. They can go back and study whatever they didn't study before. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a systematic way for you to keep your skill set aligned every decade or so. And this is something that higher ed could be doing. They're not, right? And I'm talking about MOOCs or open ed courses or things. I want to talk about a structured thing that is recognized where you take a year away from your corporate role, add what you're missing, right? Because usually not missing 800%. You might be missing 20 or 30%. And then you kind of come back instead of keep on going. This would be, again, I don't
I
understand.
agree.
It doesn't exist, right?
I agree in concept. I mean, I know you're more tied to the education community than I am. To me, if you're in certain industries in 10 years, I'm not sure higher education is going to have any value when you can get on the job train. But I think there is a need. The need is there that you talk about, whether it's provided by traditional education,
Yeah,
whether it's
structure. Okay.
right. Whether it's provided by third party associations like us, whether it's provided by, here's a crazy concept. What if it's provided by the government agency? Now, regulators, the companies that, the organizations that ultimately will decide the policy on this stuff. Think about like your driver's insurance, right? You take the safety test and they give you an incentive. So they're actually paying you to be safer. What if we actually paid people in the form of tax write-offs or whatever, instead of penalizing people? Why don't we pay people? It'll solve a lot of these issues around the whole fun political debate between socialist programs and capitalism. What if you have a solution that does both? You're actually creating more jobs and justifying the tax breaks that you're giving people.
Well, look, I just talked to a lot of educators and a lot of executives in higher ed, and everybody's in crisis and everybody's freaking out, and you go, well, you have an entire, because all you do is think about 18-year-olds. You've got an entire market, which are working professionals, right, who need to be kept up to date, especially in a world where tech dominates the workforce, right? And you don't do anything for those people. So yeah, I'd love to see, some struggling liberal arts school somewhere say, as of now, we don't take kids. From now on, our entire student body is going to come from working pros, and we're going to redesign the entire school to keep you refreshed as you go through your professional career. As far as I know, that doesn't exist in a formal way, and it would be nice if that were, to me, there is a big, blue ocean innovation area waiting for higher ed
I
to
love it.
say there's a market where that's going to be completely, not forget underserved, non-served, and who's desperate for a way to stay current with things like AI.
So if you're watching this and you're an institution and that you think that's a good idea, go for it. Carlos gets 10% for the idea, but no, good conversation as always, Carlo. We always run through our hour here, but really interesting conversation. And anybody who's watching this who needs help, we're offering free coaching sessions and industry briefings on a variety of digital transformation and automation and AI topics. So go to network.irpaai.com to schedule. We're also planning on launching some client user groups and communities, chapters, and things like that in the coming months. So if you want to get involved, DM me. Otherwise, we'll be back next Wednesday at same bat time, same bat channel. Yes, Carlos?
See you again, Dan. Of course, always great to be part of the conversation. Thanks to everyone who's watching and listening in. I'll see you next week.
Have a great week, everybody. Take care.
Take care.